After years of talking about Star Wars online, if there's one thing I've learned over this period, it's not just the Star Wars galaxy that's divided, it's the fandom too. This divide obviously has existed long before Disney became its stewards, and as recent history has shown, such a divide is going to plague this fandom long into the future. And disagreement is fine. In fact, it's a part of what keeps stories alive. People have to care in order to disagree. But what I've seen from certain corners of the fandom goes so much farther beyond just disagreement. It's toxic, it's immature, and often completely detached from honest discussion. I'm talking about the people who have spent years hating the sequels, especially Rey, yet can't explain why without twisting logic, exaggerating moments, or just plain ignoring context. Now, a short disclaimer, none of this is to say that if you're someone who has any distaste for the sequels or Rey as a character or any of that your perspective is invalid inherently. I'm simply just pointing out that after 8 years of doing this on YouTube, the closest thing I've gotten to an honest discussion is I've been told far more by people speaking on your behalf simply that I'm a shill, rather than engaging with my points in a good faith, honest discussion. These are people who are speaking on your behalf, and at the most generous of times are backing sources like Doomcock to justify their perspective, which to me seems far more telling that there's just such a greater number of people whose opinion about the sequels is rooted in delusion and hysteria rather than anything good faith than there are people with actual good faith reasoning as to why they dislike the sequels, or Rey in this regard. So today I want to talk about that, and not to win an argument, but to ask a bigger question. What does this kind of obsession say about us as fans, and how far we've drifted from what the spirit of Star Wars itself is? One of the most common claims I hear is that Rey stole the Skywalker name. It's repeated like gospel, but when you actually look at the reasoning, it collapses instantly. People say she didn't earn it, or that it disrespects Star Wars or the bloodline or whatever. But Star Wars has had a long history promoting that identity is chosen through our actions, not specifically bloodline. Rey embracing the Skywalker name isn't theft, it's the very essence of the saga's moral code. We've seen this message in countless stories that blood does not contribute to someone's identity. It is their actions that make them who they are. Take Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. He's not a good or bad person because of who he is related to. That's his fear. But he's a good person because he makes the choices a good person would make. He doesn't let his bloodline dictate who he is. That's a core element of his character development that he overcomes. Anakin accepted the identity of Vader, but chose to take back his identity as Anakin when he was protecting his child from Palpatine, redeeming his soul and becoming the person those who loved him knew to be again. Action determines who you are, not blood. Even Luke promotes this idea to Rey when she's at her lowest moment of personal doubt. So when people call it stolen, what they really mean to say is that it wasn't the ending they wanted. And you know what? That's fine. You can dislike that decision, but twisting the story's meaning to justify your dislike isn't criticism, it's denial. For years, I've heard the same recycled talking points. She's a Mary Sue. She's too powerful. She has no flaws. But when you actually compare those arguments to people like Luke or Anakin, they just don't hold up. Luke masters the Force rapidly. Anakin is literally born of it, which fans use to justify his powers and skills, yet no one calls them unrealistic. No one bats an eye at Anakin fixing his sabotaged pod racer mid-race and still winning, or single-handedly blowing up a space station in a ship he's never piloted before, at 9. But Rey needing help to destroy 2 TIE fighters? Skidding the Falcon across half of Jakku? Taking more than a few hits? That's God mode, apparently. Anakin being considered the most powerful Jedi ever because the prophecy, being the only argument brought up to justify his excessive power, is apparently fine, but Rey being either captured or tortured every movie, manhandled and held in place without any ability to resist, knocked unconscious on multiple occasions, constantly is needing someone to protect her from dying, and of course, actually literally dying, is OP to you people? The reality is the criticism was never about storytelling, it's about personal emotion, resentment wrapped in analysis. These fans don't want to understand the story, they want the story to validate their expectations. And when it doesn't, they rewrite the narrative to protect their ego. That's the heart of the problem. The inability to separate, I don't like this, from this is objectively bad. Let's address something directly. The claim that Rey stole the Skywalker name. If someone truly believes that, the burden of proof is on them. They have to answer, why would Luke and Leia not want Rey to have the Skywalker name? These are two characters who guided her, trained her, and believed in her. Luke literally tells her some things are stronger than blood in relation to her fear of what her relation to Palpatine might mean for her. Luke is telling her that who she is, based on how she chooses to act, is the only defining maker of who a person is. And by her actions, she shows herself to act more like a Skywalker than a Palpatine. Leia trains her for a year while Rey works under her command as part of her resistance. They mourn Han together. They comfort each other over Luke's passing at the end of The Last Jedi. Rey even has a tearful farewell with Leia before Leia's death, who, mind you, gave her life to protect Rey. Their bond isn't brief. It's deep, compassionate, and built over time. Something many fans conveniently ignore by focusing only on on-screen minutes and still managing to oversimplify them and expect to be taken seriously in good faith. If you cannot address all of that without saying Luke was probably crashing out over Rey taking his name, that is simply you projecting your emotions into his shoes, not making an actual good faith argument. Secondly, how can you claim she stole the name when stealing means taking something without permission? She didn't. When Luke and Leia's Force ghosts appear, as Rey is asked who she is, that's not coincidence. That's symbolic approval. Force ghosts appear to guide those in need, to give direction and affirmation. Their presence in that moment is their permission. If you need Vader screaming "No!" to understand that he's conflicted before saving Luke, then you're missing what visual storytelling is. Star Wars has always spoken through gesture, symbolism, and emotion, not just literal words. So unless you require something to be said aloud to believe it, the meaning is clear. Luke and Leia gave her that name. She didn't steal it. She inherited it spiritually, emotionally, thematically. Lastly, if you claim Rey did not earn the Skywalker name, consider asking yourself what would be required to earn it. But I mean really ask, what would Rey actually have to do in your eyes to have earned it? If we're going to ask the question, did Rey earn the Skywalker name? I think the only logical and fair way to analyze that question is to compare her to the best example of a Skywalker, which is Luke, on the grounds that he hasn't killed any children thus far. And we can be shallow-minded and make the comparisons about level of strength in the Force and their accomplishments, but those kinds of things aren't really what defines their characters. It's their personalities and ideologies that make them who they are and contributing to their achievements. Luke doesn't redeem Vader through an act of physical strength. Luke redeems Vader through an act of mercy while the Emperor is trying to goad an act of cruelty from him. If I had to make a list of the kind of traits a person would need to achieve in order to at least be comparable to a Skywalker, would be personality traits like Luke's kindness and compassion, his willingness to uphold the Jedi values, and being willing to die for those values. Not just the values of the Jedi, but his own personal ones that he was established with before he truly started his journey as a Jedi. Personally, I would say 1, upholding the family's moral code. Unless anyone would like to provide examples of Rey not behaving with kindness and compassion for those in need. Check. 2, following the ways of the Jedi, such as when she strives to win Ben back to the light, offering him a path, but upholding the values of the Jedi when he refuses. Check. And 3, being willing to die to uphold those values as a Skywalker and as a Jedi, when she risks her life to defeat Palpatine on her own and literally dies in the act of destroying him. Double check. Add on to it the time of service she invested into the family through Leia primarily. I think it's fair to say she made a good enough impression on them to warrant allowing her to adopt their name that she can take pride in and reject the identity of Palpatine that only Palpatine demanded her to accept based on her blood relation to him. It's okay not to like Rey as a character. It's okay not to like the sequels. But if your criticism can't stand up to logic or just the factual events that are provided in the movies, if it relies on denial or if it distorts what actually is on screen, maybe it's time to look inward. Because Star Wars isn't just a story about heroes and villains, it's a mirror showing us the dangers of obsession, the cost of hate, and the strength in compassion. If you spend years hating something that teaches love and redemption, maybe the problem isn't the movie. Maybe the problem is what you've allowed yourself to become. I don't have to use inaccurate metaphors or trivializations of events or exaggerations to back claims like Jar Jar being depicted as clumsy and having a deep aversion to violence. The entire movie he's set up in, simultaneously being made general of an army, is not great storytelling. Neither is what is supposed to be a tragic love story between two people that's built on one being shown to be constantly disturbed and uncomfortable by the other's beliefs and hearing them confess to murdering women and children like animals. I can just run the footage. No exaggerations required. Yet for Rey, it's she yaps for 2 minutes and just bonds with Leia that she's only shown on screen together with for 2 minutes. This is not truth. That is negative fabrication, if not just outright delusion. Here's a truth most people don't want to have to face. You can accept something as canon and understand it and still dislike it. That's a mature, healthy form of criticism. But if you can't articulate why you dislike something without exaggerating, oversimplifying, or misrepresenting it, then maybe the issue isn't the story. Maybe it's not people not understanding or listening to your argument. Maybe it's your own unwillingness to grow, accept, and move past your issues. Because at some point when disliking a film turns into a love to hate it, that's not analysis anymore. That's obsession. That's turning fandom into a toxic identity. George Lucas didn't make Star Wars to inspire hate. He made it to teach balance, compassion, empathy, and self-awareness. The dark side isn't just evil. It's what happens when you let your hate and fear define who you are. And yet, many of the same people who claim they want to protect George Lucas's vision as fans have become the very thing his story warned us about. When your identity becomes built on what you hate, when you spend years searching for reasons to stay angry, you've lost the light. As George Lucas once said, the dark side's destructive cycle begins with greed and fear of loss. That attachment, such as Anakin to his mother and Padme, is what makes a person greedy. This creates a fear of losing what one possesses and a desire for more power to prevent that loss. The cycle of suffering, according to Lucas, is fear of loss leads to anger, which becomes hate and ultimately causes suffering. The suffering is not just others, but for the dark side user as well, who becomes perpetually unhappy and consumed by their own selfishness. But somewhere along the way, too many fans forgot that message. Blinded by resentment over a character, they refused to understand, or at least refused to understand her accurately. You can dislike choices in Star Wars. You can wish the story went differently. I do about a lot of things, but I do my best to adhere to the teachings of Star Wars. Teachings that ask for the maturity to move on from what I hate and embrace what I love. But if your reasoning can't survive an honest conversation without the use of immature memeing, then maybe it's time to ask why that is.